Welcome back. You're still watching Signature Morning on Signature Television. So we're switching gears right now to talk about local government autonomy and the issues around it. Very recently, we heard the Supreme Court practically asking that the local governments have its autonomy, so much so that the allocations from the federal government will not be directed to the states or maybe be paid into the joint account, even though there have been controversies regarding that pronouncement by the Supreme Court, because so many persons have, in one way or the other, picked whole from that judgment, given that the Constitution clearly stated that monies from the federation accounts must be paid into a joint account. But if the Constitution hasn't been amended, the Supreme Court couldn't have given that judgment. But we have a barrister who would help us, unravel some of the issues that have playing out in the last few days as it regards to this topic. Barrister Dr. Chijoke Abo, good to have you. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
Several issues have actually come up as it relates to this matter. Can you talk us through the constitutional provisions as it relates to the allocation to the local government vis-a-vis the Supreme Court's judgment?
Yes, thank you very much, Alex. I want to say that we, at the formation of this country, are elected to pursue the path of federalism.
Okay.
And that has been...
Go ahead.
And that has been, the views of the founding fathers of Nigeria, the likes of Dr. Azikiwe, the Awolowo's, the Sardauna of Sokoto, and the Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa and others. They believed that to harness the diversity of the Nigerian nation, you must have a federal state, so that administration at local levels was a residual matter. And so, even under our constitution now, local governments are not federating units. We just have the states and the federal government, the central government. And that is why we have federalism. Now, in line with the Constitution of Nigeria, if you go to section 7, subsection 1, it says that democratically elected governments are guaranteed. However, that the states will make laws for the existence of these local governments, their establishment, their structure, their composition, their finance, and their functions. So, in other words, the total control is within the domain of the state and the state houses of assembly. Now, with respect to creation of local government, the section 8 lays out that system. It is also within the domain of the states to create additional local governments. However, because the existing local governments are listed in the schedule to the Constitution, that is where the National Assembly comes in to make consequential amendments to include in the names of new local governments as the need arises. So I think that what is envisaged is that states are free to create as many local governments as they want, provided they can always fund those local governments. And if you go to direct finance and funding of local governments, there are areas where local governments can make their own internally generated revenues, like markets, like parks, and all that, naming of streets and so on. Those are all in the schedules to our constitution. But section 162 is very clear on allocations coming from the federation account to local governments in states. It must be paid into a joint account, a joint state and local government account. When it comes into that account, then internally generated revenues within the state, I think a certain percentage, I think about 10%, is also paid into that account and then released to local governments for them to function. The Constitution never envisaged that in a federation like ours, that local governments will be directly funded by the central government, by the federal government. So it is indeed an aberration that our highest court agreed that such funding should take place. I agree with the decision of the Supreme Court to the extent that it says democratically elected governments are guaranteed. And part of the guarantee will be releasing of funds to those democratically elected governments. And it's unfortunate that in most states in the country, they are run by caretaker committees. In our zone, for instance, if you take the case of Anambra State, it's been a while. I think for a very long while,
More
they've
than
not
10
had
years, actually.
they've not had elected local government. So it's a problem. However, I think there is danger for us to adopt that this funding guarantees autonomy. Cannot. Because under the same constitution, the state independent electoral commissions are created. And those state independent electoral commissions are given the responsibility of organizing local government elections. So some people who have been calling that the elections should be transferred to the INEC, in my view, those calls are misconceived. Because INEC itself has not discharged its functions very creditably. The elections that INEC have so far organized have been questioned one way or the other. If we take the last 2023 general elections, it was not anything to write home about. And in a federal system, to now want to, what do we really want? Do we want true federalism or do we want a unitary government? Why should we take out powers when we are calling for devolution of powers? It is contradiction in terms for people to insist that even the residual powers given to the states will be handed over to the federal government. That is where we have a basic, disconnect.
One would have thought that the president, having a retinue of barristers and even SANs under his cabinet, they would have thought this through and even advised accordingly. What could have been the process, if at all, this thought of paying directly from the federation account into the local government account is conceived? What would have been the process for it to follow due process?
I think by the time the implications of this present decision and the motives of the federal government come to the fore, people will realize that it is not for altruism that the president and the federal government are acting. The current president, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, when he was the governor of Lagos State, created some additional local governments for Lagos State. And because of it, the then sitting president, Olusegun Obasanjo, and the federal government refused to release money due to local governments in Lagos State to the Lagos State government. This same president, as governor of Lagos State, went to court, to the Supreme Court, to seek interpretation of the sections that I just mentioned in Attorney General of Lagos State against Attorney General of the Federation. And therein, the Supreme Court gave the correct position of the law that monies due to the local governments in Lagos State should be released to the Lagos State government, headed by Bola Ahmed Tinubu. And of course, the monies were released to him in compliance with that decision. I am surprised that he's taking the opposite of what transpired at that time to play out now. That he is going to the same Supreme Court to now say, release directly money due to local governments and not to state governments. That is not the provision of our constitution, and that is not envisaged in a federal system that we have. So by the time it plays out, we will realize that it is a recipe for anarchy, because it tends to create an avenue of direct funding of local governments and direct dealing of local governments with the federal government. And I see it as subverting the authority of the states. And it's a recipe for anarchy, because it is going to ignite problems, particularly when elections come. Because he who pays the piper obviously dictates the tune. And so the local governments are going to be receiving instructions from the center in subversion of their very state governments. And I don't think it will augur well for a federal state like ours.
I mean, this almost sounds like what we have in the police, where everyone is clamoring for state police that will be under the governor of the state. And then people are also complaining that, having a federal police hasn't really solved our problem as it stands. I'm just thinking, really, if we fear that there will be a direct influence on maybe an election, direct communication between the local government and the federal government. I mean, beyond election, what else do you fear? Because again, the state governments haven't really managed the local government so much so that we have most local governments shut down. Most developments that are supposed to be for local government are not done. You know, it's almost seems as if people are left out of the governance of things. As if local government would help to reach out to people in the rural areas, but that hasn't happened under the state government. Yes. So why do you think it will change in any way with the federal?
Charles, what guarantees do we have that by merely creating powerful local governments with funds at the local levels that they will deliver? Many of these local government chairmen are absentee chairmen. Go to their local government, they don't reside there. They reside in state capitals. Some operate from hotels.
Who cost it?
You know,
the state government. That's
no.
Under state watch.
No. That's a fundamental question of our system of condoning corruption, right from the federal through the state to the local. Look at the Nigerian states. Look at a minister who was accused of embezzling billions of naira. Till today, no prosecution. She's just suspended from office and nothing else has happened. Many other high-profile corruption cases are all over the place. Go to our National Assembly. Those who have issues to answer with the EFCC are the people who are making laws for us and invariably dictating public morality for us and dominating the polity. Is that what is supposed to happen? Come to the state levels. The situation is not different. Even those who have cases with the EFCC, they are still paid pensions from state funds for serving for 4 years or 8 years at most in the states, and you pay them pensions. Now, there are many retired civil servants who have served for 35 years and retired for over 10 years. They have not received their gratuities and their pensions are not regular. Is it a just system? Now, when you create emperors at the local level, what is the guarantee that you can control them? There are no guarantees. It will really take somebody who is committed to doing the job to do it. I think that what we have missed is that our electoral system has not been cleansed. And I think we need reforms in that system. The Uwe's panel report, the Nnamani panel report, have not been implemented long after they were made. Unless we want to make a cleansing of our electoral process, I think this whole idea of manipulating the elections will continue to subvert the sovereignty of the people. Because those who get in don't feel they have any legitimacy, and so they act the way they want. In fact, some people who occupy public positions will brag that they bought those positions, and therefore they are not accountable to anybody until the transactional event, they recover their investments, as it were. So that's the problem that we have. There are no guarantees that those local governments will work. Don't forget, in this state, in Enugu State, for instance, when Governor Sullivan Chime was in power, he did a good partnership with local governments. And local governments under that era delivered. Some of them built roads, some of them built visible infrastructure. So it's been that. Unless we return to making local government systems, resonate with the people, they cannot work, even if you give them 10 billion naira every month. Unless they resonate with the people, unless the choice of the people at local levels are respected, they cannot work. What we have today, particularly in our climate, is what we call the Ojebego syndrome, the endorsement by the godfathers. And once they are endorsed, they must go, whether they are popular with the people or not. That is the bane of our democracy.
I mean, I'm just thinking through it now, because you mentioned influence from the federal government if the allocation comes directly. We have 774 local government areas. So you would have 774 chairmen. Is it not better that way than to have this local government over the years, under the state government, still haven't done anything? We haven't seen rural development. We haven't seen so much at that level. These monies, when they are paid, the state governors decide what they use the monies for. I mean, the best they can do is to put caretaker committees and direct monies that are being used, how they are used. Isn't the state government supposed to focus more on certain things rather than talking about what local governments are doing? I mean, the argument will still go on. If we don't try something else, we wouldn't know the benefits of that thing if we don't try it.
Well, Charles, I think that basically, unless we reform our leadership recruitment system, this problem will continue. I don't think that, you will solve the problem merely by transferring, the control from the states to the federal government. And therefore, that solves the problem. It cannot. Right now, the state governments still control the state independent electoral commissions.
Well, there are also talks about changing that. Well, INEC would really want to do the...
That will need a constitutional amendment.
Yes.
But unfortunately, I hear the National Assembly is introducing a bill. If they are introducing a bill to create another institution, a federal institution, to now organize elections for the 774 local governments. Is that constitutional? Can the National Assembly do it without amending the existing constitution? That is the problem. That is the problem. So as long as the states control the state independent electoral commissions, so long will the continuity of local government non-performance continue. What do we do then? I think that the better thing, rather than saying we scrap it and then transfer the powers to the center, is to perhaps insist on amending the constitution so that the composition of that state independent electoral commission will be better defined. It will not be the governor who will nominate all the members, so that various institutions, the Nigerian Bar Association, the civil society groups, the Nigerian Medical Association, and some other well-known organizations can contribute, they can nominate members. And then the political parties themselves may be under the auspices of their general umbrella association, what's it called now? The Association of Political Parties or something.
Okay, IPAC.
IPAC, yes. They can nominate a member or something. So the governor brings the chairman perhaps. Then everybody will be watching the system. And then we make our law in such a way that there will be electronic transmission of results. And then we insist on internal party democracy. So this idea of just one person picking somebody and he becomes the chairman, whether the people vote or not, is quite mimicry of democracy itself. Of course, we can't say that in Nigeria we're in democracy, we're in civil rule, because certain indices of a democratic society are not manifest in Nigeria. We don't have them yet. And until we have them, we will continue to make all these false steps. I don't believe that direct funding, per se, as the Supreme Court has said, will guarantee the performance of local governments, or indeed the independence or the transparency of the system. I don't think. Much less do I believe that we should over-concentrate power in the center, in a federal state, by transferring the powers of state independent electoral commissions to the Independent National Electoral Commission. I don't think that will work, because they too have not even delivered in the mandate that they are supposed to deliver on.
Interesting. So going forward for you, what happens now that we have this issue? I'm sure that one or two persons must have brought that to the fore of the Supreme Court, or maybe to the presidency, as the case may be. We have a case in our hand. 33 Oyo State local government chairmen say they are detaching themselves from Algon, which is the umbrella body for the 774 local government chairmen across Nigeria. Is that legal? They are actually stating that they don't want to be dissociated from the state government, that the joint account thing should continue, that the federal government should keep paying the monies through the states. To what extent do you think that they would, win in this situation?
Well, for me, it's a freedom of association. If they decide not to belong to that to the Algon anymore, I think it is within their rights. The ALGON is just an association of local governments of Nigeria. So it's not a binding. It's not a binding. It doesn't have, a binding force in terms of membership of such bodies. I think it's a voluntary thing. So if they decide that they don't want it, because they have fears that what they get from the states may no longer come, then I think it is their right.
No, but it goes against what the Supreme Court has pronounced. I mean, if the Supreme Court says any state that doesn't have a democratically elected state chairman or local government chairman will not be, getting the allocation for the local governments.
The local governments in your state, are they not elected? Are they caretaker chairmen?
Well, even if they are, is it constitutional for them to dissociate themselves?
Yes. Once they are elected, I told you Section 7.1 says the Constitution guarantees the existence of democratically elected governments. So once they are democratically elected, yes, they exist. Yes. So what is then democratically elected? It is what you make it. It is what the various state governments are making of it. Look at what is happening in Rivers State, for instance. The people who are, despite the ruling, the governor is going on with the caretaker committees. Some others are going on. Some others are now rushing to organize what they call elections. And when the elections come out, you will see that it is just a mockery of elections, properly so called, because it will be so lopsided, and the outcomes will be predictable, as it were. So I do not see that resonating with the people. I think that the essence of federalism is that the residual, local governance should reside with the states, which are federating units. Let every state have, their powers to create as many local governments as they can fund, to maintain local governments, to allow, that will give the people the opportunity to choose their leaders. At the local levels, they know those whom they trust to be their leaders. Under the East Central State, for instance, they had more than a 3-tier government. They had, beyond the divisions that we had in those days, there was also the community councils, which went down to the various communities. So the communities had an input, and it was working. My own father worked in the local government system, and the local government systems were working. They had functional equipment to maintain rural routes, to maintain agricultural oversight and extension services, and so on. They helped primary schools build certain infrastructure. In fact, desks that are used in some of our primary schools, if you come, you will still see it, were built by local government. So why can't we have it as functional as it was in those days? Of course, that was when the military were in power. Those things worked. But before even the military, once power resonates, as in a typical federal state, power must flow from below, upwards. It does not flow like a military command from up, down. If you make it like that, then it's an imposition, and people will continue to resist it, and it cannot work. That is the problem that we have. Until we get it right, there is no reason why we must have a centralized local government system in the whole of Nigeria. Those reforms that brought us like this came in 1976, when we had these local government systems. And when, of course, the Obasanjo government thought each community should have a traditional ruler, even in areas that people are essentially Republican. And what you now have in some areas that didn't have traditional rulers, it brought about some kind of contest, political contest, to bring out the Igwes. So in some places, the people who are dear to local people were elected. In some other people, the money bags bought it. And of course, many of those money bags were not resident at home. They were absentee traditional rulers, just like we have absentee local government chairmen. And if we continue in that trajectory, then it is very difficult to really have the impact of government permeate the people.
Do you see more local government chairmen across states join this bandwagon of these 33 local government chairmen in all your states, pulling out of ALGON and saying they want to form another association that they want this federal government to maintain payments into joint account?
I will not be surprised at that, so long as the system of electing local government chairmen resides with the states, and as long as the state governments pick those who control the administration and management of the state independent electoral commissions, so long will the lackeys of these governors be thrown up as candidates for local government elections. And of course, they will get the rubber stamp of the state independent electoral commissions, whether the people like it or not. And so, when their boys are in place, the governor calls you, bring your allocation, even if the federal government gives it direct to you, bring it to the government house, and it will be done. So I think the better way is that if the constitutional provision is allowed to be in place, then our parliaments at the state level must be more proactive. In fact, the Constitution vests the powers of making laws and approving the projects of local government in them. I do not know why many of our state parliamentarians are not bold enough to speak out, even in the face of tyranny. You know, they keep quiet. And so when they are cowed, the governor works like a sole administrator. And no checks and balances will exist. That's the bane of our system.
So beyond the goodness that looks like, because we've seen Michael Zuckerman even on our programs, you know, welcome the developments, even without highlighting this part that you have said. Beyond the gains that this would bring, does it mean, do you think that this would not in any way become advantageous for local government to have autonomy apart from what the state government already have over them?
Well, I with all due respect to the learned senior advocate, Michael Zuckerman, I think that even amongst us, among legal practitioners as a division, in fact, we are organizing a conference on local government autonomy, and we are going to analyze the decision of the Supreme Court vis-a-vis the earlier decision, which I believe is a better law, of the same Supreme Court in Attorney General of Lagos State against Attorney General of the Federation. And we will x-ray these things. I think that what the Supreme Court has done is, the benefit to me is just to guarantee democratically elected governments. Well, democratically elected, as I said, is what you make it. Because the process of election is domiciled in the bosom of the governor and the state governments. So what do you expect? A change? No. It is still, the decision is quite superficial. If we expect that there will be a fundamental change, no, I don't see it. And because of the endemic corruption in the Nigerian nation, I don't see them performing because you give them money directly. I don't see it happening. So I think there must be collaboration, you know, between the local governments and the states. I think that the parliamentarians must do oversight and supervise these local governments for better delivery. But if we just think that because we are giving money and nothing else happens, the local governments, a lot of them will pocket the money. Visit the local governments. They're like absentee local governments, absentee chairmen. You find people only on tables where money exchange hands.
Yeah, the reason why this is happening is because of the changes that the government is trying to do at the federal level.
No.
So that if the money is given to you, you won't complain that you have been stifled by the states.
No.
Because that's a complaint we actually hear every time.
I disagree. That's a generalization, really. It has not been so in everywhere. And besides the allocation, there are areas that local governments can also generate internal revenue. But unfortunately, the states are taking over many of those, like in market stalls, like clearing of refuse, like naming of streets and all that. These are things that, you know, local rates that local government could get. Like, what do you call it? Property rates that people, you know, local governments could get. But the point is that some states are centralizing those rates and collecting it as land charges, you know, in one place at the state level, at the state ministries of lands. And this is been happening. So if local governments are given some areas of responsibility, allowed to do what they are supposed to do in terms of charges in the management of cemeteries and burial grounds and so on, These are functions that local governments should perform. But they are not performing those functions. So they just wait idly to get money from the center. If they are encouraged to develop markets, develop parks, and collect money from them, they should be functioning even without allocations from the states. So I don't agree that by mere fact of giving them money, they will now begin to perform. That should not prevent them from being present on their seats as local government chairmen in their local governments. When people come to visit you, you tell them, we are not performing because money has not been given to us, but I'm here to perform. But when people get to local governments and they don't even see you, and you are not even resident in the area, how can you say you identify with the local people? That's a problem.
Dr. Barrister Chijioke Agbo has given us an insight into what he thinks with the latest development as it concerns the Supreme Courts and, of course, the autonomy of the local governments. Absolutely insightful. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We truly appreciate you.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. The program returns shortly after this. Just stay with us.